Welcome back to her Fireside Stories. My son locked me in a nursing home on my birthday. No cake, no hug, just a set of forged papers and a suitcase. I didn't pack. That was the moment I realized the boy I'd raised alone, the one I fed and clothed and cried over in hospital. Waiting rooms no longer saw me as a mother, but as a burden. My name is Harriet Fletcher, and on the day I turned 62, I was discarded like a problem to be solved. I sat in a cold, unfamiliar room, heartbroken and humiliated, with no phone, no freedom, and no idea how I'd ever feel like a person again. But fate had other plans. A crumpled lottery ticket would land in my lap, along with a second chance I never saw coming. I never thought I'd celebrate my 62nd birthday by watching my only son haul my suitcase into a place meant for the forgotten. Yet there I was, standing on the faded linoleum of Golden Horizon Nursing Home, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would shatter my ribs. The sign outside was cheerful pastel yellow paint, a quaint little flower in the corner. But inside the halls reeked of antiseptic and stale coffee. My name is Harriet Fletcher, and I used to have a life. I used to style my silvery bob with care, tucking each strand in place so I looked elegant, even if I was only going to the grocery store. I used to believe that my son Trevor was my greatest blessing. Now, I wasn't so sure I had dressed up that morning, wearing my favorite cardigan, a soft lavender wool that brought out the streaks of silver in my hair, thinking Trevor and I were going out to lunch. He'd arrived with a half-hearted smile, his sleek undercut hairstyle gelled perfectly in place, looking more like a corporate executive than the little boy I'd once bandaged when he scraped his knee. I remember feeling uneasy because he seldom visited, but he insisted we had a reservation. I followed him out the door, a flicker of hope in my chest. By the time we arrived at Golden Horizon, I realized I'd been tricked. Trevor muttered something about safety and professional care, but I only caught fragments through the roaring in my ears. He'd already packed my clothes, all shoved into a battered suitcase that I recognized as one from my attic. One the two of us had taken on a trip when he was 7. It felt like a final blow, like he was discarding me with zero remorse, to fade away in a place lined with wheelchairs and beeping machines. As the intake nurse guided me to a bland room with a single window overlooking a brick wall, I caught Trevor's eyes. For a second I thought I saw guilt there, but it vanished. He turned and left. No goodbye, hug, no promise to return soon, just a stiff nod. It might as well have been a funeral procession, and I was the only one grieving. Little did I know that same week would bring the twist neither of us could have predicted. I spent the first night at Golden Horizon, sitting stiffly on that narrow bed, unable to sleep. The mattress felt like an ironing board, the scratchy sheets reeking of bleach. I couldn't stop replaying the moment Trevor pulled out the power of attorney papers from his jacket pocket, a jacket that cost more than I earned in a month back in my working days, and calmly signed me away. There were no candles, no birthday cake, no tender mother-son banter, just the chill realization that I'd effectively been cut from his life. I tried to call him from the room phone, but the line was disconnected. When I approached the head nurse to ask about it, she gave me a strained smile. "Your son said he'd handle your communication needs," she cooed, speaking to me in the same tone one might use with a confused toddler. My stomach sank. That meant Trevor had likely canceled my cell service, too. It made sense. If you want to bury a secret, you snuff out all routes to the truth. My roommate at Golden Horizon was Mabel, an 80-year-old woman with thinning white curls and warm brown eyes that seemed clouded by both age and sorrow. She spent most of her time either asleep or talking quietly to a photograph of her daughter. Over a crackling old TV set, Mabel confided in me that her daughter used to visit faithfully, then stopped coming without a word. Mabel never understood why. Her story stung because it reminded me how fragile loyalty could be. Those first few days, I tried to keep my pride intact. I reminded myself that I was still me, Harriet Fletcher, who had raised a boy to adulthood on her own, who had once managed an entire office as an executive assistant, who wore her short, carefully shaped bob with a certain dignity. Yet each time a nurse walked by and patted my hand, calling me sweetheart, I felt smaller. My identity was shrinking to fit the mold of a helpless senior, left to drift in corridors that smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. I had no idea the biggest shock of my life was about to land in my lap, tucked in a crumpled piece of paper that would change everything. On the fourth day, just as I was contemplating my next move, a nurse's aide named Ebony came in to replace my roommate's IV bag. Ebony had her braided hair pinned neatly in a high bun, strands of gold woven through, that gave her a touch of brightness in the otherwise dreary setting. She caught me trying and failing to read an outdated gossip magazine. I had always been a voracious reader, but my mind was so preoccupied that I couldn't focus on the shallow celebrity dramas. Something about Ebony felt different. Whereas the other nurses offered polite smiles and gentle dismissals, Ebony's gaze was sharp. Observant, she asked if I wanted some tea, so we walked together to the kitchenette. Once the door closed, she said quietly, "I heard you ended up here on your birthday." "That's messed up." I blinked, startled by her bluntness. "My son thinks I'm losing my memory," I replied, bitterness creeping into my tone. "Apparently it's safer for me here." Ebony snorted. "Safer for you or safer for his plans?" She had a knack for cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Without giving me time to respond, Ebony pulled out a folded lottery ticket from her pocket. It looked old, the edges soft with handling. She said she'd found it in the personal belongings of a resident named Mr. Ronald, who had passed away last week. The facility had no record of relatives and no one claimed his property. "I didn't know what to do with it," Ebony whispered, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "Mr. Ronald used to say, if I ever won, I'd get out of this dump the next day." "Guess he never got the chance." She placed the ticket in my hand. "Maybe you can check if it's worth anything," she said. "I have a feeling you need a little luck right now." I stared at the ticket, feeling a peculiar tremor in my chest. It was probably useless, some long-expired stub for a drawing nobody won. But Ebony was right about one thing: I did need luck. And if Mr. Ronald couldn't claim his dream, maybe I could. God knew I needed an escape plan, and I needed it soon. That evening, while Mabel dozed off with her headphones humming a static-laced radio program, I slipped into the recreation room. Golden Horizon kept an ancient desktop computer in there, intended for supervised internet sessions. Most residents were too frail or disinterested to use it, but I still remembered how to boot up a computer from my working days. I glanced behind me to make sure no staff member was hovering, then typed in the lottery website's address. My hands shook as I entered the numbers from the ticket. I tried to calm myself, telling my nerves it was pointless. This was surely a losing ticket. Nothing in life had ever been that simple for me. When the screen loaded, time itself seemed to freeze. My eyes flicked to the jackpot figure, and I felt the blood drain from my face. The page displayed an $8 million grand prize for that exact combination of digits. "No, this can't be," I whispered, rubbing my eyes so hard I saw spots. I double-checked the date. It was only 2 weeks old, valid, real. I thought about Ebony's casual remark. "Maybe you can check if it's worth anything." Worth anything was an understatement. This was life-altering, heart-pounding. I printed the confirmation page, folded it carefully, and hid it under my cardigan. My mind whirled with questions. Could I even claim it? It wasn't my ticket. Did I have a right to this sudden fortune? And more pressing, if Trevor found out, would he try to seize it? My hand reflexively clutched the power of attorney papers I knew he had forced me to sign. That gave him legal sway over many of my affairs, but not over a secret lottery ticket that wasn't even in my name. A surge of adrenaline coursed through me. I wasn't just Harriet Fletcher, a lonely senior tucked away in a corner. I was the holder of a ticket that could set me free. But I also knew claiming that money outright could put a target on my back. If Trevor had orchestrated my confinement, he'd have no qualms about doing something worse to control my newfound treasure. I had to play this carefully, or I risked losing everything, maybe even my life. I didn't sleep a wink that night, my heart drumming a frantic rhythm as I concocted an escape plan. The entire situation felt surreal, like I was trapped in a spy novel, rather than an elderly care facility. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the lottery numbers flash behind my eyelids. Thoughts of $8 million coursed through me, tangled with fear and a shaky glimmer of hope. In the morning, Ebony came by to hand me my medication. Under her breath, she asked, "Did you check the ticket?" I only nodded, eyes wide with panic. She took a moment to understand. Then her jaw dropped. She leaned in. "You serious? You won." Without waiting for my answer, she grabbed me by the elbow and guided me into an empty staff office. That's when the dam broke. I spilled everything about my son's betrayal, his slick hairstyle that matched his slick attitude, the power of attorney fiasco, and my plan to vanish before he discovered the windfall. Ebony listened intently. When I finished, she slowly let out a breath. "Harriet, that's... wow." She rummaged through a drawer and found a sticky note, scribbling something on it. She pressed it into my hand. "I know a guy who does pro bono legal work for seniors," she whispered. "He used to volunteer here before we got new management. I trust him. His name's Gideon Ross, and he's got close-cropped hair, parted so neatly that it always looks like a runway style for lawyers. He might help you figure out a safe way to claim that ticket." My eyes stung with gratitude. Ebony had no reason to help me, no reason to care. Yet she seemed determined to ensure I had a fighting chance. Clutching the sticky note, I felt the first spark of real hope since Trevor dumped me at this place. But hope was dangerous. It made you bold. What if Trevor caught wind of my restlessness? Would he show up to tighten the leash? I had no way to communicate with the outside world, except through clandestine channels. One thing was certain, I had to outsmart the one person who knew exactly how to undermine me. I spent the next few days sneaking around Golden Horizon, like a teenager with a secret crush. Using Ebony's phone during her lunch break, I called Gideon Ross. He answered in a calm, practiced tone that radiated competence. I explained my situation in hushed, urgent whispers. At first, Gideon was silent, probably thinking this was some scam. Then he asked a barrage of questions. Did I have proof of my mental competence? Documents showing that I'd been forcibly placed here against my will? And most importantly, did I truly trust the person who gave me the winning lottery ticket? When I mentioned Ebony, he exhaled in relief. "She's the real deal," he said, "Harriet. I can help you. But we have to be careful. If your son has power of attorney, we need a strategy to claim the ticket without raising red flags." We arranged for Gideon to visit Golden Horizon under the guise of a financial counselor offering free workshops to seniors. It would provide a legitimate reason for him to meet me. During that call, I felt like I was plotting a prison break, but maybe that's exactly what it was, a break from the unspoken prison Trevor had locked me in. Finally, Gideon arrived late one afternoon, a stack of brochures in hand, wearing a crisp suit and sporting that neatly parted hair Ebony had described. I attended his workshop along with a few other residents, trying not to look too eager. Afterward, he pulled me aside under the ruse of discussing retirement budgeting. Behind a closed door in a dusty storage room, I showed him the lottery confirmation and the date. He nearly dropped his paperwork. $8 million, he whispered. "My God, Harriet, do you realize how fast that could vanish if your son catches wind of this?" Before I could answer, Gideon handed me a binder labeled Asset Protection. Inside were forms for establishing a private trust under a different name, something that would legally shelter the winnings. My breath caught, a wave of relief rolled through me, coupled with the unsettling knowledge that I was about to hide a fortune from my own child. Signing those trust documents felt like a surreal betrayal of the son I had once adored, yet I had to protect myself and what might become my only shot at genuine freedom. Gideon warned me that if Trevor discovered the lottery ticket, he could try to argue I was mentally unfit to manage such a windfall. He might have doctors or acquaintances line up to declare me incompetent. It sounded far-fetched, but given his willingness to lock me up in a nursing home, I believed it. That same evening, I returned to my shared room to find Mabel sitting upright, her usual sorrow replaced by a distant smile. She was holding a Polaroid photo of her daughter taken when both were younger, arms around each other beaming. I asked if she was okay. She told me she'd just gotten a letter from her daughter after more than a year of silence. Tears glistened in Mabel's eyes as she recounted how her daughter planned to visit soon. The news should have warmed my heart, but instead it reminded me of everything I'd lost with Trevor. Trying to quash the bitterness, I slipped my newly signed trust documents into a folder at the bottom of my dresser drawer. I stared at them, feeling torn between relief and regret. This money could lift me out of despair. It might let me start over, help others, or even turn the tables on Trevor if he pressed his advantage. But deep down, I yearned for a confrontation. I wanted to look him in the eye and ask him why he did this. What made him decide that my life, my comfort and dignity was so disposable? Before I could sink too deep into self-pity, Ebony popped in with a conspiratorial grin. "There's a vacant office on the second floor," she whispered. "Nobody uses it. You can store important papers there if you're worried about staff rummaging through your things." Her kindness staggered me. For a moment, I thought maybe the world wasn't completely cruel. Maybe Trevor was just an outlier. And maybe, just maybe, I had a fighting chance to reclaim my life. Each day at Golden Horizon was beginning to blur. Breakfast at 7 a.m., rubbery eggs and mushy oatmeal. A stale group activity around 10 a.m., usually board games or craft projects. Lunch at noon, overcooked vegetables, bland chicken. The highlight was Ebony's short visits during which she'd slip me news. Gideon had filed the trust. The official documents had been processed under a corporate entity named HF Holdings initials that could stand for anything. No mention of Harriet Fletcher anywhere. In a way, the facility was more confining now that I had a secret worth millions. I felt like an inmate harboring contraband, anxious that someone would spot the tension in my face and confiscate my hope. Meanwhile, Ebony's tasks often brought her to my wing, and she'd duck into my room, updating me on the trust's security features. She also mentioned I'd need a new phone, something untraceable. We hatched a plan to order a simple flip phone online, delivered under another staff member's name. Then Ebony would sneak it to me. As the days turned into a week, I found myself in a perpetual state of alert. My ears pricked at any mention of new visitors, any phone calls at the reception desk. Part of me dreaded Trevor waltzing in with that smug grin, brandishing fresh legal documents that would tighten his control. Another part, fueled by the betrayal, wanted him to show up just so I could see the look on his face when I refused to bow to him anymore. I also took to writing in a small journal I found in the activities room. It was meant for doodles, but I used it to document dates, times, and any suspicious occurrences. If Trevor or his associates tried to claim I was senile, I'd have a record of my lucidity. On its pages, I scribbled updates about Gideon's steps to secure the lottery claim, proof that I was fully aware and consented to every action. This was my paper shield against any potential accusations of dementia or confusion. Yet every night as I tried to drift off to the hum of Mabel's nighttime radio, I couldn't shake the nagging question, what if Trevor won't stop until he has every cent? I got my answer sooner than expected. One crisp afternoon, just as the leaves outside had shifted to a brittle golden hue, a receptionist wheeled over a small cart of mail to the residents in my wing. Normally, I never received anything. Trevor had cut off my phone, and all my other contacts were likely unaware. I was here, but this time there was a letter for me sealed in a plain white envelope, no return address. I tore it open with trembling fingers, half expecting Trevor's name to pop out in bold letters. Instead, I found a single sheet that made my blood run cold, an official notice of debt recovery from an institution I didn't recognize. It demanded repayment of a substantial loan I supposedly co-signed with Trevor more than a decade ago. The letter threatened legal action if I didn't comply. My mind reeled. I'd never co-signed such a loan. The horrifying possibility sank in that Trevor might have forged my signature. An echo of Ebony's words about him being dangerous rattled through my mind. If he'd put me here under the guise of mental decline, maybe he'd done so to ensure I couldn't dispute any questionable debts. Images of him rummaging through my documents at home, practicing my signature, over and over flickered before my eyes. Steeling myself, I tucked the notice into my cardigan pocket. I'd show Gideon. If Trevor was bold enough to falsify a cosign, who knew what else he'd done? The lumps in my throat felt like they were made of lead. Betrayal in families is the cruelest kind because you end up replaying every memory, every tender moment, every sacrifice, searching for clues that it was all a lie. Later that day, I confronted Ebony about the letter. Her eyes flashed with worry. "We need to get Gideon on this immediately," she insisted. "This might just be the tip of the iceberg." She was right. I could almost sense the walls closing in. Trevor wasn't just content to park me in a nursing home. He wanted to ensure I was legally incapacitated if I discovered his misdeeds. Little did he know I was gathering evidence, and my secret lottery win had given me the means to fight back. Where are you listening from, dear friend? I'm here in my cozy little studio in Vermont. Leave a comment and don't forget to subscribe. If this story touched your heart, I borrowed Ebony's phone once again and Gideon arrived within the day, slipping into the office Ebony had suggested on the second floor. As soon as he saw the debt notice, his brow furrowed in a deep frown. "This is serious," he said. "Forged signatures, possible identity theft." "Harriet, if he's done this once, he might have done it multiple times. We need to pull all your financial records." My stomach churned. For so many years, I'd covered for Trevor, handing him small loans here and there, bailing him out of minor troubles, trusting that he'd pay me back when he could. I never pressed him. "He's my son," I would tell myself. "He'll do right by me in the end." But all that trust had been weaponized against me. I couldn't help but wonder when it started. Had he been forging my name since I first taught him how to write the cursive F in Fletcher? Despite my trembling hands, I set my jaw. "Let's do it," I said to Gideon. "Check everything if he's been stealing from me or from anyone else I wanted exposed." My newly discovered fierceness surprised even me. But maybe that was the blessing of being caged. Eventually, you get tired of living on your knees. Over the next 2 days, Gideon tapped into his network. He discovered at least 3 suspicious accounts opened under my name, one for a line of credit, another for a bank loan, and a third for a credit card with a frighteningly high balance. Each time the signatures matched my own, except the style was just a bit too neat, too deliberate. He must have practiced. Gideon concluded grimly, flipping through pages and pointing out where Trevor's forgery technique slipped with every new revelation. The shock of betrayal settled deeper into my bones. Yet there was an odd sense of purpose in it. I realized that while I had been blindsided by my own child, I was no longer the helpless victim he expected me to be. I had allies. Ebony Gideon and a hidden ace worth $8 million. Soon enough, Trevor would learn just how badly he had underestimated me. Just as Gideon was preparing to file a formal complaint against Trevor, something else arrived that put me on edge. A second letter this time with a more polished seal, the Dayton County Probate Court. Inside, I found a summons. Trevor was petitioning the court to declare me mentally incompetent, citing memory lapses, erratic behavior, and a risk of financial exploitation. My breath caught in my throat. This was no idle threat. He was ramping up a legal battle that could strip me of my autonomy. Gideon's eyes widened when he read the document. "He's not wasting time," he said, tapping the paper. "We'll need to present solid evidence that you're mentally sound. This could get ugly." I nodded, my stomach twisting. I had spent my entire adult life believing in a mother's unconditional love. Even now, a small piece of me yearned for Trevor to just apologize. But the reality was clear. Trevor wasn't the child I had lulled to sleep with bedtime stories. He was a man who viewed me as an obstacle. We sprang into action, gathering proof of my lucidity. Ebony helped me secure a thorough medical examination with a local geriatric specialist, Dr. Amanda Redman, who wore a sharp pixie cut and had a calm but keen gaze. Dr. Redman ran cognitive tests, asked me to recount details of my life, had me perform memory and logic exercises. I passed with flying colors. When I admitted that I felt under siege by my own son, her expression softened, but she remained professional. "I'll do what I can." She promised to make sure the court has the full story. Meanwhile, Gideon began preparing a counter-argument. We documented every suspicious account, every clue of forgery, every piece of correspondence that hinted at Trevor's manipulation. "We'll show the court that he's the threat, not you," Gideon insisted. Even so, knots of dread tangled inside me. What if Trevor's legal team painted me as a confused old woman chasing lottery fantasies I hadn't publicly claimed the prize? Yet Gideon said we should wait until we were in the clear. But the funds were there hidden under the trust's protective umbrella. Was I strong enough to stand before a judge and bare my soul? I wasn't sure, but I had no other choice. The day of the competency hearing arrived faster than I could prepare emotionally. Gideon escorted me to the courthouse in a borrowed sedan, as we couldn't risk taking an identifiable car from Golden Horizon. I wore my best navy blue coat, freshly pressed, and styled my silvery bob so that it curved neatly at my chin. Dr. Redmond had provided a formal assessment, attesting to my mental clarity, and Gideon clutched a stack of documents that might as well have been the story of my life over the last 6 months. Trevor was already there when we walked in. He cut a striking figure in a tailored suit, his neatly combed hair slicked back as if he were stepping onto a red carpet event. A pang of memory hit me. I once ruffled that same hair when he was little, marveling at how soft it was. Today it seemed as harsh and unyielding as his actions. The judge was a gray-haired woman who exuded a no-nonsense demeanor. I found myself oddly comforted by her presence. She reminded me of a school principal I once knew, tough but fair. Trevor's attorney stood and launched into a long-winded statement about my deteriorating cognitive abilities, citing testimonies from neighbors who had noticed me misplacing things and forgetting appointments. He also produced a letter from a psychiatrist I'd never even met diagnosing me with mild dementia based on hearsay. My hands shook beneath the table, but Gideon gave me a slight nod. When the time came, he introduced Dr. Redmond's official evaluation, complete with test results and personal observations. Dr. Redmond herself took the stand, calmly refuting Trevor's claims, point by point. Gideon then presented copies of the suspicious loans, underscoring that I was the one being financially preyed upon. I saw Trevor's jaw tighten, a twitch forming at his temple. Then it was my turn to speak. I stepped up to the microphone, voice trembling for only a moment before I steadied. "I'm Harriet Fletcher," I said, "and I am of sound mind. I have been forced into a care facility under false pretenses by my own son." I'll never forget the look in Trevor's eyes as I recounted the events. His expression flickered between annoyance and something that looked like fear. I described how he took me out on my birthday under the guise of a celebration only to deposit me at Golden Horizon. I talked about the power of attorney paperwork he'd manipulated me into signing and the cell phone service he'd shut off to isolate me. My voice caught when I mentioned how it felt to be left alone and confused in a place that felt more like a holding pen for the forgotten than a caring facility. The courtroom fell silent. Even Trevor's attorney seemed to hold his breath, realizing the tide was turning. Gideon introduced partial evidence of Trevor's forged signatures. The questionable debt notices and the suspicious credit lines opened in my name. The judge's eyes narrowed as she examined each exhibit. Her gaze slid over to Trevor, and I saw a flush creep into his cheeks. When it was Trevor's turn to respond, he stood up so suddenly his chair nearly toppled. He insisted he had only been protecting me. My mother often forgets things. He claimed, his voice strained. She called me multiple times late at night, rambling about nonsense. He presented recorded voicemail snippets, some from nights when I was upset or anxious. Taken out of context, I sounded frenzied, but Gideon quickly countered that I was simply a worried mother left to cope with mounting concerns and no support. Finally, the judge pressed her lips together, leaned forward, and stated she would need time to review all of the evidence. She scheduled a continuation hearing for 2 weeks later. The bailiff dismissed us, and I found my knees nearly giving out. Gideon gently guided me out of the courtroom while Trevor brushed past us with a scowl. I felt dizzy, a slew of mixed emotions swirling inside me. Relief that the judge hadn't ruled me incompetent right then and there, anger that Trevor was willing to lie so blatantly, and a glimmer of hope that the truth might actually prevail. But I also knew these next 2 weeks could be the most dangerous yet. Trevor Cornered would either double down or find a new way to trap me. Back at Golden Horizon, the atmosphere felt decidedly different. Word had spread that I'd stood up for myself in court. Some of the staff, previously neutral or dismissive, began showing me a quiet respect. Others seemed wary, as if they feared I might expose them if they stepped out of line. Only Ebony remained as consistently supportive as ever. We chatted in low tones, aware that walls have ears. A day after the hearing, Ebony caught me in the hallway, her braids pinned back in a sleek style that underscored the tension etched into her face. "Be careful," she warned. "I saw a man wandering around yesterday asking about you. Said he was your nephew, but I've never seen him before." My heart thumped. Trevor might have sent someone to dig around or intimidate me. That suspicion was confirmed when I received another envelope in the mail, again unmarked. It contained a single photograph, Trevor and me from years ago, laughing at my 60th birthday party. On the back, someone had scrawled in bold letters, "Stop now or else." I swallowed hard, the photo trembling in my hands. Ebony peeked over my shoulder and her eyes widened in alarm. "He's threatening you," she whispered. I shook my head. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just a scare tactic. Either way, it's meant to rattle me." Ebony pressed her lips together. "Harriet, you have to keep going. You've come too far." She was right. Something about seeing that old photo, once a precious memory now turned into a weapon, ignited a new resolve in me. I wasn't just fighting for my rights or my fortune. I was fighting for every person who'd ever been silenced by the ones they loved. Trevor might be trying to muzzle me with intimidation, but he had no idea that I possessed an $8 million wild card, and that I wasn't afraid to use it legally to protect myself and bring his schemes to light. I stuffed the photograph into the same folder with the forged documents and debt notices, fuel for the fire. Let him come, I was done backing down. Gideon worked swiftly. He reached out to the Department of Justice with an anonymous tip about potential identity theft and financial exploitation by a relative of an elderly individual. My situation in coded form. While we hoped the authorities would take interest, we weren't sure how quickly or strongly they'd respond. Bureaucracy could be slow, and Trevor might have enough savvy to keep himself a step ahead. Meanwhile, my days at Golden Horizon grew more surreal. I found myself immersed in whispered conversations with other residents, many of whom had their own stories of familial betrayals or abrupt abandonments. A gentleman named Oliver, sporting a short salt and pepper crew cut, confided that his niece had taken over his house, claiming he couldn't live alone. Another resident, Denise, tearfully mentioned that her grandson had sold her car to protect her from driving. These accounts turned my personal battle into a broader crusade. I began envisioning what could be done if I ever accessed that lottery money freely without fear of Trevor's interference. Maybe I could help people like Oliver and Denise get the legal or financial assistance they needed. The thought buoyed me in the face of my own uncertainty. As the next court date loomed, Gideon insisted on a more thorough medical evaluation, setting up a second appointment with Dr. Redmond. This time we videotaped the session, my permission, her confirmation, everything. We wanted to leave no doubt about my mental clarity. Sitting under those bright office lights, I went through memory exercises again, recited addresses from my past, and solved basic logic puzzles. When Dr. Redmond declared I was functioning at a level well above any threshold for concern, I felt a weight lift off my chest, yet anxiety clung to the edges of my mind. What if Trevor produced more fabricated reports, more manufactured evidence, or found another unscrupulous doctor willing to label me senile? And what about his threatening letters and shady nephew prowling the halls? My mind spun with possibilities. Still, a tiny voice kept reminding me I had resources now secret but potent. I just had to live long enough to use them. The days crept by, each one marked by new rumors and tension in the halls of Golden Horizon. Some said they saw Trevor's car parked outside, while others whispered about staff being questioned by men in suits. I tried to shut out the speculation and stick to the facts. I could verify. Ebony was my lifeline, delivering updates with a quick knock on my door or a subtle tap on my shoulder in the hallway. Finally, the day of the continuation hearing arrived. Once more, Gideon escorted me in a nondescript borrowed car. My heart pounded as we walked through the courthouse metal detectors. This time the stakes were higher. If Trevor succeeded in declaring me incompetent, the $8 million trust would be in legal limbo. Gideon assured me the trust was structured to withstand a challenge. But if a judge believed I was truly unfit, it could complicate everything. We entered the courtroom to find Trevor already seated, accompanied by a different attorney, a high-priced shark by the look of his designer suit. Dr. Redmond arrived shortly after, a reassuring figure amidst the tension. The judge wasted no time calling the proceedings to order. First, Trevor's new attorney took the floor, brandishing more evidence of my supposed confusion: clips of phone calls, old texts, taken out of context, and statements from neighbors claiming I'd once wandered the streets at night. I felt myself flush. That was the time I was searching for my lost cat. Cashew. The memory of rummaging through bushes at midnight with a flashlight flared up. But in Trevor's twisted narrative, it was a sign of mental decline. My blood simmered at how easily facts could be warped. Then Gideon rose and methodically dismantled each claim. He entered Dr. Redmond's detailed evaluations into evidence, pointing out how Trevor's entire case hinged on ambiguous testimonials. He stressed the possibility that Trevor had financial motives, hinting at the forgery but not revealing the lottery windfall. The judge listened intently, her eyes flicking between Trevor and me. When Dr. Redmond took the stand, she confidently laid out her findings. I see no indication Harriet Fletcher is anything but fully capable of making her own decisions, she stated. A hush fell over the courtroom. Trevor's attorney made a half-hearted attempt to discredit her, but it fizzled like a damp sparkler. After Dr. Redmond, Gideon presented a concise timeline illustrating how I ended up at Golden Horizon. In crisp bullet points, he recounted the suspicious circumstances, Trevor arriving on my birthday. me leaving my house under the impression of a celebration, and the abrupt admission to the facility. With each point, I could almost feel Trevor's veneer of credibility chip away. Then the judge turned to me, her gaze sober. "Mrs. Fletcher, do you have anything to add before I make a ruling?" My heart rapped against my chest. I stood forcing myself to hold Trevor's stare. "Yes, Your Honor. I've loved my son dearly all my life, but I've come to see how he's taken advantage of me. I'm not incompetent. I'm simply a mother who trusted too much, and I deserve to live on my own terms." Trevor shifted uncomfortably, crossing and uncrossing his arms. His attorney tried to interject, but the judge lifted a hand to silence him. After a pause that stretched like an eternity, she spoke. "It's clear Harriet Fletcher is not only competent, but also the subject of potential financial exploitation. I find no grounds to declare her mentally unfit. The petition for guardianship is denied." A wave of relief swept over me, and I heard a faint gasp from the onlookers. Gideon squeezed my shoulder in victory. Trevor stood rigid as a statue, anger rolling off him in waves. At the judge's request, Gideon submitted an official statement that we would be investigating the possibility of forgery and identity theft. My son's face reddened. The moment we stepped out into the hallway, he locked eyes with me. I expected an outburst or an apology, anything to acknowledge what he'd done, but he just turned on his heel and stalked away, his expensive shoes clicking ominously against the polished floor. In that moment, a strange calm settled over me. I'd won a vital battle, but the war wasn't over. And something in Trevor's departing footsteps told me he wasn't done either. Within a day of the judge's ruling, the local news began buzzing. At first, it was small-town chatter. Rumors of a mother versus son legal drama involving allegations of elder abuse. But soon the story gained traction. A local reporter reached out for an interview wanting the inside scoop. I declined, wary that too much publicity might invite more trouble, especially with $8 million quietly resting in a trust. Still, the tension mounted like a rising tide. I started noticing unfamiliar faces in the parking lot of Golden Horizon, a reporter with a notepad, a camera operator fiddling with lenses. It made me uneasy. I'd spent weeks longing for someone to hear my side of the story, but once the spotlight turned my way, I found the attention nerve-wracking. People on social media weighed in with half-truths and speculation. "Maybe the son was just concerned," wrote one commenter, while another retorted, "He's probably after her savings." What no one realized was that I possessed far more than mere savings. Gideon urged me to keep it that way until we're certain your son can't sabotage your claim. "Don't step forward with that ticket," he warned, "or your life will become a circus." I knew he was right. Even so, my conscience stirred. Something about holding that fortune in secret felt both exhilarating and burdensome. I wondered how many families had turned sour over lesser amounts. In the midst of this media frenzy, Ebony confronted me one morning, eyes shining. "Harriet," she said, pulling me aside, "I've been reading up on elder law cases. There's a real need for advocacy. People get shoved into these places and forgotten. Even if they have money, they're often scared or coerced into giving it up." Her braids swayed as she spoke passionately. "If you do get full control of your finances, you could really make a difference." Her words struck a chord deep inside me. I was already fantasizing about using the lottery money to break myself out of captivity. But could I go further and help others? The notion took root in my mind, blossoming alongside the fierce desire to see Trevor held accountable. Another week passed and the Department of Justice finally bit. Gideon received a phone call from a federal investigator who had reviewed our anonymous submission about Trevor's suspicious financial dealings. Apparently, the forged documents and lines of credit were enough to pique their interest. They wanted me to provide a formal statement, albeit discreetly, to avoid tipping Trevor off prematurely. A swirl of emotions gripped me. vindication, fear, and an odd sadness that it had come to this point. Arrangements were made for me to meet the investigator in a neutral location, an unmarked federal office in the next county. Ebony pulled some strings to arrange a medical transport pass, claiming I needed an off-site appointment. I felt a pang of guilt lying to the staff at Golden Horizon, but this was bigger than a social outing. Gideon drove me there, my heart hammering with each passing mile. Inside a modest room that smelled of stale coffee, I answered the investigator's questions. They were thorough. When did I first suspect foul play? Did I recall specific dates when Trevor might have accessed my personal documents? Had I noticed changes in his lifestyle that couldn't be explained by his legitimate income? Each question peeled back layers of memory, reminding me how long I'd overlooked the warning signs in favor of preserving the illusion of a dutiful son. By the end, I was emotionally exhausted. The investigator, a calm man with neatly trimmed hair and a meticulous notepad, thanked me and said they'd be in touch if Trevor's forging signatures and funneling money through unauthorized lines of credit. He could be looking at serious charges, he remarked. I knotted my throat too tight to speak. Gideon squeezed my hand as we left his own, parted hair almost askew for once. This is progress, he said softly. But it might get dangerous. I knew he was right. With each new stride toward justice, we risked provoking Trevor further. His attempt to declare me incompetent had failed, but that didn't mean he was out of place. As we headed back to Golden Horizon, I clutched the seat, bracing for whatever storm might follow. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and if you feel like staying a little longer with me, don't forget to subscribe. It truly means the world. My fears were confirmed when 3 days later, a nurse found me in the lounge, her face pale as she handed me a single sheet of paper. "This was slipped under the front door for you," she said, shaking her head in concern. Large block letters spelled out, "Drop the complaint or regret it." No signature, no address, just a clear message. I felt numb reading and rereading those words. Trevor's tactic was as unsubtle as it was menacing. Ebony rushed over when she heard. She looked ready to fight someone. "That's it," she snapped, fists clenched. "He's going too far. We have to let the DOJ know." I nodded, my mind swirling with images of Trevor practicing my signature under dim light, forging documents, and now threatening me in half-hidden ways. He seemed more like a character in a crime show than the boy I once taught to ride a bike. Gideon reported the threat immediately. The investigator advised caution and suggested I keep a low profile. I wanted to scream, "I'm stuck in a nursing home. How much lower can I get?" But ironically, this place was also a fortress. Trevor might manage to slip in letters or spook me with shady visitors, but he hadn't dared confront me publicly again. Perhaps the fear of exposure was holding him back. Even so, I knew my days at Golden Horizon were numbered. I couldn't stay in limbo forever. With the hearing resolved in my favor, I was free to leave anytime. But forging a path outside with $8 million in a trust and a vengeful son lurking was complicated. Gideon and Ebony urged me to consider finding a secure place where Trevor wouldn't suspect. We talked about me getting a modest apartment in another county, or even another state, just until the DOJ's investigation concluded. Yet part of me bristled at the thought of running as though I were the criminal. I had done nothing wrong except trust someone I loved. Still, if it was a choice between fleeing and risking my life, I'd choose survival. I was done playing the helpless victim. That weekend, under Gideon's guidance, I quietly transferred from Golden Horizon to a small studio apartment 3 counties over. Officially, I was discharged because I had been found perfectly capable of independent living. Ebony helped me pack, hugging me tightly before I climbed into Gideon's car. She promised to visit when she could, though we both understood it might be risky for her to be associated with me openly. We parted with misty eyes and a renewed bond that was strange to admit. Who'd have guessed I'd formed such a friendship in a place designed to swallow people's golden years? The apartment was nothing fancy. Clean beige walls, a threadbare carpet, and a tiny kitchenette. a far cry from the cozy bungalow I once called home. Yet as I unpacked, I felt a stirring sense of liberation. I placed the trust documents in a lockbox Gideon provided, then tucked that box in the darkest corner of my closet. My short bob had grown a bit ragged over the stress-filled weeks, so I found myself trimming it in front of the mirror with shaky hands. Each snip felt symbolic, slicing away the dread that had clung to me since Trevor's betrayal. Gideon visited often, bringing groceries and updates from the Department of Justice. They're building a case, he reported, flipping through a pile of papers. They've confirmed multiple counts of forgery. Trevor could face heavy penalties if charged. The news both thrilled and terrified me. If he was indicted, it would vindicate my stance, but it also meant Trevor might lash out like a cornered animal. On a whim, I checked local news sites. My story wasn't front-page material anymore. The media had moved on to fresher scandals. I preferred it that way, but I couldn't fully relax. Every unknown number that called my new phone made me jump. I slept fitfully, listening to every creak in the old apartment building. Still, it was a victory to brew my own coffee in the morning, to choose my own meals instead of wilted cafeteria trays. Piece by piece, I was reclaiming my autonomy. Sometimes the big triumphs, the lottery ticket, the court wins, felt almost secondary to these small daily freedoms. Life in its quiet moments was starting to feel like mine again. It was nearly 2 months later when the dam finally broke. Gideon arrived unannounced one morning, rapping urgently at my door. His usually immaculate hair looked mussed, and his eyes held both excitement and a flicker of apprehension. The DOJ indicted Trevor, he announced the moment I opened up. They're going public with fraud and identity theft charges. I felt the world tilt as I processed his words. According to Gideon, investigators had found enough evidence of Trevor's forging spree, plus suspicious bank deposits, that a grand jury returned an indictment. The story was hitting the news cycle fast. Trevor would soon be the talk of Dayton for all the wrong reasons. My chest constricted at the thought. Even after all he'd done, a maternal pang struck me at the reality of him facing prison. But then I remembered those letters. The nursing home betrayal, the mounting debts in my name. He'd left me no choice. Within hours, local stations ran headlines. Local businessman accused of defrauding his own mother. My phone buzzed nonstop with calls from reporters, so I powered it off. Gideon stayed with me as a buffer, ensuring I didn't make any statements that could jeopardize the DOJ's case. He also reminded me that I still hadn't formally claimed the $8 million. Now might be the right time, he said carefully. Trevor's focus will be on his legal troubles. If you claim it through the trust, you'll have the financial security to do whatever you want. Move, travel, start that advocacy idea Ebony mentioned. But I hesitated. Claiming the money felt like a final act in this saga. Did I want to stand publicly as the mother whose own son tried to have her declared incompetent just to keep her from discovering she was a secret millionaire? The scandal might overshadow the entire elder abuse angle I wanted to highlight. Yet Ebony's words echoed in my mind. You could really make a difference. I thought of Oliver, Denise, and Mabel back at Golden Horizon. How many other seniors were trapped by manipulative relatives or dismissive guardians? I looked Gideon in the eye, heart hammering. Let's do it, I said, voice firm. I'm not hiding anymore. Claiming the lottery was surprisingly straightforward once we'd set up the trust. Under the name HF Holdings, Gideon filed the paperwork with the state's lottery commission. They released the funds into an account shielded behind multiple legal layers, ensuring Trevor couldn't contest it. The news broke a week later and the press had a field day. Rumors exploded. Did Harriet Fletcher vanish with millions? Was Trevor trying to fleece me, or vice versa? In a calm, measured step, I agreed to one exclusive interview with a reputable journalist, much like I'd done in court. I wanted the truth to be heard without sensationalism. Sitting in my modest living room, I allowed them to film my short silver bob, my well worn cardigan, and the humble space I inhabited. No fancy mansion, no hidden vault of gold coins, just a woman who'd been shoved aside until she discovered she was worth more financially and personally than anyone had assumed. During the interview, I spoke candidly about the betrayal, the forging of my name, the harrowing experience at Golden Horizon. I also revealed my intention to fund an organization dedicated to protecting elders from financial abuse, inspired by Ebony's passionate pleas and my own brush with vulnerability. I saw the cameraman's eyes mist as I recounted how I'd felt on that bleak birthday, powerless and forgotten, only to find myself days later holding the key to freedom. The piece aired in prime time, and the public reaction was overwhelming. Donations poured in for the new foundation. Messages of support flooded my mailbox. Strangers from across the country shared their own stories of neglect, exploitation, and heartbreak. For the first time, I understood the magnitude of what had happened. This wasn't just about me and Trevor. It was about an entire generation often dismissed when they still had so much to offer. Trevor's trial date loomed, but I found I no longer obsessed over it. I'd severed that toxic tie, and now the justice system would handle him. Instead, I poured my energy into hiring a small team of lawyers and social workers for my foundation. My quiet apartment buzzed with new life phone calls and planning meetings. Day by day, the sorrow of Trevor's betrayal eased, replaced by a fierce commitment to making sure no one else endured what I had. Thank you so much for listening to Harriet Fletcher's extraordinary story today on her Fireside Stories. It's a powerful reminder that no matter how deeply someone betrays you, your strength and dignity can always prevail. Harriet took an unimaginable situation, being abandoned in a nursing home by her own son, and turned it into a mission that changed countless lives. I'd love to hear your personal thoughts on Harriet's journey. Do you agree with how she handled the situation? What would you have done differently? And please share with us where you're tuning in from. I love seeing our global community come together around these stories. If Harriet's story moved you, please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories just like this one. Your support truly keeps the fireside burning bright. Until next time, keep your spirits high and your hearts open. See you in the next story.